Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever the fuck you're watching. This is our first off-season episode of the Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. I got Ryan with me, and I've got the artist or blank screen, formerly known as Bentley. Ryan, how you doing, bud?
I'm good. This is the most attractive the podcast has been since we've done it.
Yes, yes. Our Q rating has gone through the roof. Really hot with 25 to 32-year-old women right now because we have less
Ooh,
of our faces on here.
yeah, yeah. If they're drinking,
Bentley, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm coming to you live from places that shall be, ladies and gentlemen. We are mobile today.
Yeah, I think we're running into some connection issues, so we'll try to we'll play around it as best we can, Bentley. So if I cut you off at any time, it's probably because you're breaking up. So I apologize in advance, but
Yeah.
not really.
Or you're just super rude. One of the two.
One of those two. Take your pick and run with it. Speaking of picks and pickups, we're talking free agency. So every year, I think we're a little maybe for lack of a better term, taken aback by how much money goes out the door in the first hour of free agency. The money in the NBA is silly. Rosters are smaller. TV money's huge. The international market is huge, and there's just a lot of money to go around. And I think we saw a little bit of a ripple effect, right? With new CBA, teams are trying to reset their own salary cap. So teams are going to other teams that have, maybe some flexibility with salary cap, and they know as things kind of kick in with some of the new stipulations of the CBA, they can manipulate money one way or the other, or they can afford to bring in guys and still stay within some of the strictures of that new agreed upon structure of the salary cap. Um, Ryan, I want to get your thoughts first. Kind of, what are some of your initial takeaways from free agency?
um, yeah, I think the CBA is interesting. How that's impacting things. I think we're seeing a lot of years that kind of coincide with the money going up as well, with the new TV deal coming in here in the next couple of years. And the expectation that's going to be bigger, which I think is a fair expectation with the numbers that the NBA gets. So you're seeing guys who I think maybe you could say is an overpay in a vacuum, but based off the context, I think a lot of guys are not being overpaid. I think there's still some, obviously, but I think a lot of deals are going to be more reasonable when we look back and say, oh yeah, that the cap jumped up so much that this deal is kind of is a good deal in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and one that I think gets lost, on maybe the casual fan, right? You don't think about where the money's going, and then, you know, not to get too far sidetracked, but I often have conversations where people, because I'm a veteran, and we have some veteran experience here at the podcast, but also on the show tonight. Um, Talking a lot about like, oh, the military should be paid more than fucking NBA or professional athletes, right? Like, yeah, one, they sell a product, right? They sell a product that generates a lot of revenue, and two, if the players weren't getting paid, where do you think that money's going to go? It stays right in the owner's fucking pocket, and then you get to bitch about the owners being fucking filthy rich and yada yada yada, right? It's a self-licking ice cream cone there. So, in the context of how we're going to talk about it on this show, right? Overpaid is in the context of the structure of the salary and the salary cap and everything else, and what the player brings to the table and kind of the talent that comes with them. And I think it is easy sometimes to look at some of the deals that get thrown out, especially early in free agency with guys committing. It tends to be kind of how the market's going to fall. If you move early as a player, maybe you get rewarded with a little more money because the team's trying to build a roster and trying to fill a slot, and they're willing to pay a little more for maybe a guy like a Fred VanVleet, right? He might be a good example of a guy who, one, as you put it, with the TV deal and the new structure of the CBA, maybe his salary is what it is because of how the timing works with it. But also, he was kind of first to commit at his position, really. So I think he benefited a little bit from that as well. And he went to a team that just didn't have any expensive players on their roster, right? Like, tons of money to spend, and they wanted to get their guy, and they did. right? So some of that is kind of the things that, when we talk about overpaid, just want to kind of put it in context for maybe the casual fan that might be tuning in. Bentley, what are some of your takeaways from free agency here in the early, first week really of free agency?
Yeah, so just based off of kind of free agency periods in the past where you see a lot of movement, players kind of shaking up the league going here and there. I thought that this year resembled a lot of talent being retained. Um, Players moved here and there. Uh,
All right, Bentley, we're gonna come back to you, bud. But I think I caught the gist of what you said there, and I think Ryan and I might be able to pick up a little bit on that. So retention, right? And I think potentially some of the more intriguing signings were guys that went back to their team, right? You saw the Bucks kind of keep their core in house, and they're going to add a little bit to it. But that's a team that had championship aspirations. They have had championship aspirations for several years. One seed in the East. They have a title here in recent memory. Hopefully Bentley can get a little better connection and rejoin here, or maybe he's home and we're going to get him from his desktop. We can have him pick right back up. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on the retention and maybe more so in years past? I think Bentley's right that we have seen maybe more guys stay home, or maybe it's just bigger names that I think we're staying home this year with free agency as opposed to years past.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think there's like the philosophical side of the team building where you can get into the platitudes of, it's cheaper to keep her and, the devil kind of things, right? I think people build teams like that a lot of the time, right? It's like, I know what I got with this guy. I see him every day in practice. A lot of those guys are stars, so it makes it easy. Like Draymond Green, for example, like is a star. They know what they're getting. I think that they're paying the right price for him, and he was willing to go back there. So there's usually mutual interest. I think it's like being traded, right? Obviously, with being traded, you don't get the option to pick where you want to go very often. But
Yeah.
in free agency, you do get that option. But most people don't want to leave. They have homes. They have, especially guys who have been there a long time.
Yeah.
They've settled, right? So I think if the money is there, that is just an easier thing to do. But outside of those factors, outside of the human factors and the philosophical factors, I just think a lot of teams have very specific play styles, and they know what fits into it. Right? You can make guesses. Draymond Green fits great into Golden State. Where if he goes somewhere else,
great.
Yeah, is he just a defensive player somewhere else because of his offensive limitations? Outside of the playmaking. I guess another example would be like Jeremy Grant.
Yep.
Jeremy Grant's, they know what they're getting. He fits well with that core. Unfortunately, the Dame thing came up and kind of, I think, messed that up. But I think from a structure, it's like, I want my team to look like this. Well, you already know with that guy that he fits that. It's a lot harder to guess that. It's like in football with cornerbacks, right? When they draft cornerbacks, you're like, that's a zone corner.
Zone guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And then you're like, well, we play press man, so good luck.
Yep.
And it's like, well, that didn't work out super well. And I think GMs are just as smart as they've ever been. They make mistakes, but they're as smart as they've ever been. And I think they really understand the value of team building from a strategy perspective and also the personal side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the locker room culture, right? You mentioned the personal side. A lot of that goes into that locker room culture. I look at a guy, you mentioned Draymond Green, how he fits in Golden State. A guy like Chris Middleton too. Is he the guy that he is in Milwaukee if he goes somewhere else? I don't know, because he's afforded a lot of luxury with regards to being able to go one-on-one and utilize his skill set in ways that he might not be able to do other places, because there's only one Giannis Antetokounmpo in the league, right? There's only one guy that's like that, that's going to demand that much attention in the way that he does. So I think you're absolutely right. And you mentioned the cornerbacks in football, but baseball, there's a perfect example going on right now. And, we do a podcast here that we've been talking about it a lot this year, the Baltimore Orioles. If anybody's paying attention, they made almost no moves in free agency this offseason after missing the playoffs by a game, I think 2 games actually last year, and kind of being the surprise of the league. We looked at it and said, okay, this offseason, if they go get a pitcher and if they can get a little stronger up the middle, I think that's a team that can really make waves. Well, they went and made no moves, basically, right? I think they made one signing of an arm, and that's it. And that's the whole keep what you have. And if you love what you have, keep it and watch it grow. And that's what Baltimore's done. They're 10, I think, or 13 actually games above 500 right now and playing great baseball. Challenging the Tampa Bay Rays at the top of their division. So, you look at these teams in the NBA, we watched Golden State build a dynasty that way, right? And we watched Milwaukee finally get over the hump and win a title that way, right? Keeping your own and building in-house. We've seen guys go build these super teams and trade for a lot of players and have some success, right? LeBron in Miami is probably a good example of that, but we've also seen it fail pretty hard. LeBron in LA, with the exception of the weird bubble year, is probably an example of that not going the way that you would think that would go. So there's a lot of value there in knowing what you have and knowing that it's a fit as opposed to taking a shot. And if you miss, it can be a big miss, right? Especially with these guys that are demanding 30, 40 million dollars a year, right? And not demanding, but commanding that, because that's what salaries are in the NBA now. But the Jeremy Grant piece is really interesting too, because I think he might be the number one example of a guy who really has made a career now that he's in Portland, because he was kind of a middle of the road guy prior to maybe last year, really breaking onto the scene last year. And he got that big payday this offseason. A lot of people may have raised their eyebrows. I know my brother, I talked to him a lot about basketball as well. He kind of raised his eyebrows like, why is he getting paid like that? Well, he had career year, right? He scored more points than he ever has. He fits in a system. They like him in Portland. He fits, fits the scheme and what they're building there. So for sure. I'm trying to wax a little bit and delay for Bentley, but we'll get back to him when he gets back online. So let's shift gears and let's talk about a favorite move of yours, Ryan. Is there one from free agency that sticks out that you looked at and you said, I really like that for X, Y, or Z reason? It doesn't have to be maybe for the reason that everybody would think, but is there one that sticks out to you?
Well, I'll give an honorable mention to my hometown team. I think the Fred VanVleet move had to be done. I think it adds a lot to what they don't have. It's a super young team. They need a guy who's won a championship. He's been on a championship team. A guy who plays defense, even at his small size. Like, he's not a big guy, but he plays defense. That's a huge issue. The rest of the team doesn't really stay in front of anybody, and Şengün can't protect the rim if he's just getting drove at every play. So I think VanVleet, from a culture change and also from a skill, he's obviously very talented, but from a leadership and a culture standpoint, I think is a huge signing. So I really like that because of the intangibles, and he can play a little bit, I've heard. Yeah, I mean, there's a title. Yeah. Well, people say that's Kawhi's title, but
he was on the team, right?
Yeah, all counts the same.
Still got a ring.
What's my Wikipedia say?
Yeah.
One-time champ. I like a lot of what the Mavericks are doing. And as a person who's not a Mavericks fan, as a Houston fan, and we have a rivalry with the Mavericks, as we have a rivalry with the Spurs, I really like what the Mavs are doing. I think signing Kyrie, as much as people hate on it, I think it had to happen. I don't think you can let Kyrie go. And the metrics show that they were a much better team with him playing with Luka. The hard part is the off the court stuff, obviously. But I love the Grant Williams move. I think that's great for them. I like the Matisse Thybulle move, but apparently Portland wants to keep him. I thought that was a great signing. I think Dallas has done a lot to surround Luka with guys who can play and really defend, because he's a guy who needs defenders around him, because he's another guy he's not going to stay in front of everybody. No. So I really like what they've done. And you got to win, right? Like, when you're in Dallas' situation and you have a top 5 player in the NBA at 24 years old, unfortunately he wants to win. Like that's just how it is. If you don't re-sign Kyrie, if you don't make moves, he's probably going to leave. He's either going to force his way out or he's going to be gone like as soon as he is physically able to. And in this current environment, you can't do anything about that, right? You kind of just got to be like, all right, guess we'll find a place for you. So you got to do everything you can to make him happy. Is he going to win a championship every year? No, but you need to be competing at that level and be the power. The West is so tough, but you got to get to the dance. And I think the moves they made put them in a good situation where I think they're outside of the top 4 of the West, but right outside and be competitive with the rest of the West. And that's what you have to do with Luka, because I think he would very easily get disgruntled because he's won his whole life and he has not won with Dallas consistently at the level that I think he expects.
Yeah, and real quick, I owe Jeremy Grant an apology. He did not have his highest career scoring average this year. He had his best efficiency year, though. He really fit with Portland. He did have a higher scoring year in Detroit, but it was when they lost like 1 million games and they were just kind of jacking. But it was not his highest scoring year. It was his most efficient. However, I digress. Yeah, I like the ones you brought up. The Kyrie, that was one that, I went into the offseason thinking like, man, it really didn't go well. But you mentioned the point, right? That when Luka and Kyrie were on the floor together, they were a better team. They just couldn't figure out how to coexist, I think, at times. But I also think that they lost a lot of depth in that trade. And we see that with teams often. You go to try to get a superstar. And, I mentioned the Lakers a moment ago. I think part of that, when they made that Anthony Davis trade, they lost a lot of depth there. And we saw them struggle early with, the LeBron AD and then the bubble. Obviously, they get that. But since then, it's been kind of an uphill battle for them. It's hard to build depth when you trade a bunch of it away, especially guys that are that are actually valuable pieces, valuable enough to get you a superstar, right? Normally you're losing quality players in a trade like that. And I thought that Dallas had to sign him. I thought they had to keep him to, one, save a little face, right? That's part of the equation, but also to see this thing through, because you have an off season where you can start to build around what you've got with Luka and Kyrie. I like that they were willing to say, okay, we made a mistake, with how this was handled down the stretch, but one, we retained that top 10 pick, and two, thanks NBA, right? But and two, that we've got an opportunity this offseason with, if there's some moves, and you mentioned Thibault, et cetera, but we'll see what goes on there and how they can build around those two, because Luka is a superstar. Luka is a potential face of the league, right? In that kind of vein. And Kyrie, for all of the off-field or off-court issues and all of the weirdness that goes on with him as kind of just being, himself as a human being, or whatever it is that drives him to have these controversial takes or whatever, he's still one of the most talented basketball players that's ever laced up shoes, right? Another one that I thought was really kind of sneaky and I loved it. It doesn't make a lot of waves, but I really liked Malik Beasley for Milwaukee, because I think he's a guy that gives them what they needed in this past postseason, his depth and ability to kind of guard multiple positions. Reliable guy that's going to get you 10 to 12 a game if you give him the minutes. I also think he's a guy that can take a lot of pressure off of maybe, Middleton and sometimes maybe Giannis a little bit defensively as well. I think in the crunch minutes of the playoffs, I think is where that signing is going to pay off for them. I don't think he's going to, light up anything during the regular season, but I think a guy that provides them a longer lineup, a longer roster to be able to play some of those bigger minutes in the playoffs, which is what I think they struggled with against Miami. They kind of wore down because they didn't have, once Giannis went down with the injury, they didn't have a lot to pick up the slack. And we see this with championship teams, right? They get plucked and they get, cannibalized because they want your good players, right? You win a championship, those players have value. Bruce Brown leaving the Nuggets is a prime example, right? That's a guy that played crucial minutes for Denver, and he was plucked off that roster. So Milwaukee, I think it's a good rebuild move with Malik Beasley there. Talk to me about a head scratcher, though. Talk to me about one you looked at and you're like, I don't know about that one.
Well, I first want to say I like the Malik Beasley call out. I I overrate Malik Beasley. I think I always have. Every time I'm like, I really like Malik Beasley,
I like him a lot.
and then I watch him play, and I'm like, maybe I don't like him as much. But not that he's bad. It's just I think I overrate him. What I do like about him is he's never seen a shot he doesn't like, and
Yeah.
that type of confidence is hard to find. Because I know if I played in the NBA, I would find lots of shots I didn't like. So and around Giannis, I think you need a guy who has a quick trigger sometimes.
You get looks.
Yeah, and he can make them. You just you gotta rein him in sometimes. Head scratchers. I mean, there's some obvious ones. I think with like some of the trading. I know we're talking about free agency, but the trading obviously impacts that. I think the John Collins trade is a big head scratcher to me. Trey and John Collins were like a perfect fit together. Their play styles. John Collins in the pick and roll was like, which is the bread and butter that Trey wants to run over and over again, was perfect. And he was a great corner 3-point shooter. Yes, defensively not amazing. He was kind of a highlight defensive player. But if you're going to trade John Collins and all you get back is like salary, trade exception, I mean, that's a big loss for a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals, 2 years ago. And you, again, got a guy, Trey, who wants to win. DeJounte Murray wants to win. Like, these guys want to win. And it's like, let's get rid of I think they're like third or fourth best player for nothing.
Yep.
Maybe they're going to make a move with that trade exception, and they probably should because I think they got worse by a lot. So that would be my big head scratcher. And now that Bentley's back, I'll let him say something.
Yeah, for sure. One real quick one, and Bentley might appreciate this. I forgot to mention Rui re-signing with the Lakers. I thought was a really good move for the Lakers and for Rui because he seemed to fit a lot better in that scheme than he ever did in Washington. And I blame Washington for it. I'm a huge Rui fan, so I'm always going to blame Washington for it. Loved him at Gonzaga. Loved the fact that he ended up with Washington, and then I don't even get to really watch him grow with Washington. But I think he came into his own in that Lakers scheme. I think that's a really good signing for them to re-sign him. And I'll get off my soapbox now. And Bentley, I want to go back to you, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about. You were mentioning that a lot of the re-signings were a big piece of what you took away from free agency this year. We talked a little bit and said, it does feel like this year is a little bit more of that kind of keep your own. Ryan mentioned that sometimes it's a scheme fit, a roster building fit, that comfortability, that culture in the locker room. What are your thoughts? You'll finish your thought there with re-signing of players in free agency.
Yeah, so it almost coincides with what Ryan had mentioned about the cap going up year after next. I believe it's 2025, and how some of these deals are kind of structured. Like specifically the D'Angelo Russell deal. I don't know if you guys hit on that, but like that's a short deal that comes off the cap whenever the cap goes up. The Dylan Brooks deal is very front loaded. That will not be nearly as punishing whenever the cap goes up in 2 years. And now he was a mover, right? Not he was a mover. He wasn't a retention. However, it did feel to me that there were much fewer players that moved locations this year, and it was a lot of guys coming back to the place that they knew, the chemistry that they have with their teammates currently. And that was just kind of my takeaway. It felt like there was less movement and more retention this year compared to previous seasons, at least.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. All right. So back to you. What was your favorite move? What was a move you loved in free agency?
Okay. So my kind of cheeky favorite move, and Ryan's already shaking his head. This is a player who was drafted in 2019, I believe, and he's going to be on his third team now. He was a player. I watched him play his very first game at Duke University, and I called my dad immediately afterwards, and I said, "Hey, Dad, there's this guy named Zion Williamson, and this kid is built different. Like the way he moves, he looks like a ballerina on the court." And then he blew out his shoe, and that obviously, we all know that saga. But in that conversation I had with my dad that night on the phone, I said, "There's another guy on this court that I think is potentially better than Zion Williamson just because of his skill set and his frame, right? There's a guy named Kevin Durant who he sort of resembles." So that hasn't panned out well in my favor, but I'm still kind of holding out hope. His name is Cam Reddish, and he just signed a deal to play for the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, you may not think that that's a big deal, right? Cam Reddish, third team in 4 years, whatever, not a big deal. That's where you would be wrong, my friend. On said Los Angeles Lakers, there is a player by the name of LeBron James. You may have heard of him. He's won 4 NBA titles. All of those NBA titles have one thing in common.
Shooters.
On each of those rosters, there was a player from Duke University. This year, there will be a player from Duke University on the Los Angeles Lakers roster, and his name is Cam Reddish. So, if you are a Lakers fan, you should buy all of the Cam Reddish jerseys and be very, very thankful that he is on your team.
Yes, Gary, the take was as bad as you thought it was. You were like, "Oh, shooters, that makes a lot of sense." Like surrounding with guys.
It's a good player.
and then
I will say this though, I'm going to let Bentley maybe off the hook a little bit, depending on how you feel about my takes. But I liked Cam Reddish a lot coming out of that draft. I thought where he got drafted was a good fit. It did not pan out at all the way I thought it would. I liked his ability to shoot at the next level, and it just hasn't translated for him. His weaknesses have been exploited at every turn, and that's what they do in the pros, right?
Yep.
He hasn't learned, he hasn't gotten better, he hasn't grown as a basketball player. But in LA, they're not going to ask him to do a lot. They're going to ask him to just be a shooter, and if he figures out his role and can be that, it might be a good pickup there for LA. I'm not of the they have a Duke player, so now they're going to win a championship thing. So I will agree that I also thought that Cam Reddish had a chance to be really good in the NBA, and I missed bad on him. Duke.
I do have a real favorite. That was kind of my cheeky one.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if Ryan talked about this, and please stop me if he did already. But Eric Gordon signing with the Suns. Okay, so Eric Gordon signing with the Suns is a big deal because that's a guy who has playoff experience. He went deep with the Rockets. Actually, Ryan and I did a deep dive on Rockets playoff history today.
Nice.
But yeah, Eric Gordon has had a lot of playoff experience. He knows what it takes to win, and that's a guy who kind of you would assume would have his pick of the litter from playoff contending teams that wanted to sign him again to another 2-year deal whenever the cap goes back up in 2 years, so he can come off and be a free agent again. But him choosing to go play in Phoenix with those guys shows to me that players in this league think that is a team that's ready to win. And they just kind of have to fill out that roster. And I think it was very savvy of them to sign him to that deal, as well as another player on that roster now, Yuta Watanabe, a player that not many casual NBA fans probably know about, but he was a lights-out shooter for the second half of the season in Brooklyn before Kevin Durant got traded. And you have to imagine that was kind of a Kevin Durant recommendation, like, hey, this guy was money for me in Brooklyn. We should bring him in. He's another shooter to add to the floor to spread it out. So I know it's very Phoenix central with those two guys, but Eric Gordon's probably my favorite signing, specifically for the money. They got a deal on him. It was like $6 million or something like that. Yeah, they got a steal there with Eric Gordon, who's a guy who can play crunch time for them in playoff games.
Yeah, for sure. Veteran leadership. You mentioned it, the playoff experience. He's been on some winning teams. He's been in some good locker rooms. You also have to find those guys, right? If you've got a roster where 4 guys are eating up, $1 billion, basically, you've got to find those guys, right? And Eric Gordon's a perfect fit. I like the Watanabe move as well. Shooters, you got to have more of those. And I think that's what Phoenix is going to try to do this year. I think they're just going to try to outscore everybody 140 to 128 every night. So, Ryan, any further thoughts there? I see you nodding a little bit. Maybe a little something to jump on there with Bentley's thoughts.
Yeah, I like Phoenix's move. Me and Bentley were talking about this before. I also like the Keita Bates Diop move, who might be an even deeper cut than Yuta Watanabe.
Great news.
He was really good with San Antonio last year, which obviously San Antonio was not good last year, and maybe some people would argue some hollow stats, but his efficiency numbers were pretty good. I think he's a contributing player in the NBA, and they're getting those guys super cheap, right? It's a great spot if you're a role player, because it's like, I get to play with these stars, and if I show out, my next contract will be bigger, right? Yeah, I can go to another team that has some money, right, and get $10 million instead of $2 million, right? Like, that's a huge difference. I mean, it's a massive difference.
Yep.
So I think they've had a lot of good moves, and I agree. I love Eric Gordon. He can't defend like he used to, but he's still a great shooter. He can even handle the ball a little bit. I'm not a facilitator really, but he will break defenses down even at his old age. And he's got like a herky jerky handle. He's pretty fun to watch. I think he'll be good in Phoenix, and it'd be interesting to see what that team looks like because I've never seen a team assembled like that. With there's been star teams, but I think this one is pretty uniquely assembled.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, interesting stuff.
So Bentley, I don't know if you caught it, but Ryan was talking a bit about the trade, the John Collins trade being one of the more perplexing, head-scratching moves that he's seen this offseason. Ryan, was there any more you wanted to finish? Any signings you wanted to tack onto that, or was that kind of what your focus area was? Super perplexing move for sure.
Yeah, the only reason I don't think that's like if I was gonna like grade that, the only reason I wouldn't say it's like the bottom of the barrel, like that's one of the worst moves I've ever seen, is because of the trade exception.
Yep.
And that's literally the only reason. It's like cap space and the trade exception, but they don't really have that much cap space. It's not right. Like they were. I think they're still over the cap, I believe. So really, it's just the trade exception.
Yeah, you didn't even get under the luxury tax with that move. That's
Atlanta just signed DeJounte Murray to an extension. I don't know if you guys mentioned that. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty team friendly. 120 for 4.
Yeah, not too bad for a guy of his caliber.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think, like, why make yourself worse unless you're going to do something to make yourself better? Which, like, maybe they are. Maybe they're like, hey, by the trade deadline, we'll have a move like ready to go. But
they're going to get Zion.
I don't know what you're getting, right? Collins is like, was this gonna be like a 25 million trade exception? Like, there's some guys, but like, are they going to be better than John Collins? Like, I don't know. Like, what do you need around Trey? Some athleticism, some shooting.
That's who John Collins.
Some rebounding,
I think that was worse. As far as signing goes, I didn't like the Jeremy Grant signing. I don't think it was great. I love Jeremy Grant. I think he's defensively he's gotten a little worse because he's getting older. He used to be after Philadelphia, he was a pretty good defender. He's still got the length, but he's not as quick as he used to be. But really, an efficient scorer. He's really, he's kind of inversely improved his offensive game as his defensive game he's not bad, but it's gone down. But really, it looks terrible after Dame ass out, right? Like it looks awful, and that's not their fault. But there had to have how do you have so little awareness of what's going on in your star players camp that you're like, we think Jeremy Grant's going to be great for Scoot Henderson. Like, you have to backtrack and it's not really going to affect them because they're going to have, I think, a low salary just in general. So like he can fit that salary, but what could you have got? You probably could have moved off of him, got like a max guy, back for him or cleared cap space. I don't know. It's really going to come down to the Dame trade because I don't like the signing even with Dame. I think it's an awful signing without him. I think they paid too much for him. I don't know who they were bidding against at that range. Themselves. Yeah, against Jeremy Grant's agent.
Yeah.
But good for him. Hey, get your bag, as the kids say.
Yeah, protect that chicken for sure. I don't love the move. I defended it a minute ago, mostly because of he was a very efficient offensive player last year. But I do think it was kind of a last-ditch effort by Portland to say, okay, Dame, let's keep this thing together. I think we can go somewhere with this young kid, and he can help you kind of take some pressure off of you or whatever, and keep Jeremy Grant in house because of how successful. I mean, offensively, they were still a good team last year, but in a vacuum now, right now that Dame's likely or basically out the door. It's not a great signing for sure. I agree.
I want to say, you're kind of saying like, hey, we're getting the band back together, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, Dame, we're getting the band back together. It just so happens that band is Yellow Card and not the Beatles.
We have Creed coming this weekend.
Like they think their band is the coolest band they've ever heard, but it's not that talented.
You're not that guy.
Bentley, what about you? Head scratcher from free agency.
Kind Karis LeVert got $32 million from Cleveland. Don't know why. It wasn't good for them last year. I mean, I guess they need bodies, but he's not like a proven playoff guy, which is where they're aiming, right? Like, we all watched them lose to the Knicks last year in embarrassing fashion. And like, Karis LeVert's a ball stopper. They have a ball stopper in Donovan Mitchell already. I just didn't understand the Karis LeVert 2 years for $32 million. Like, I guess maybe next year he can be a trade piece. And again, it coincides with the cap going up. But like, I don't know. I'm just not a Karis LeVert guy. I don't think he's that good. I don't think he really elevates a team. You can't run your second string offense through him because, like I said, he's a ball stopper. So like, and they gave all that money to Max Strus.
Yeah.
It's like, I know you got to spend the money somewhere, but why not just extend Darius Garland early? Like, and then your money issues are like, they're good, or sign, I don't know, someone else. Like, literally anybody other than Karis LeVert. I didn't love that. It didn't make much sense to me. Go and get a backup five. Jock Landale was available. Like, go sign Jock Landale to back up. Okay, yeah, I know Ryan's going to say no to that because he's on the Rockets now. But, like, Jock was available, right? Like, why not spend that money on a guy who proved himself to be playable in the playoffs, especially at the center position, where you know that Jared Allen seems to not be a playoff guy at this point. But, like, to give all that money to Karis LeVert didn't make sense to me because I'm not a fan of his game.
Yeah, I think Karis LeVert is cashing big bags on the back of, like, he had a stretch with the Nets. I think it was 2018 or 2019 where he was like unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think he slept for a month and had one of the best months in the NBA. And I think he's still cashing checks on that because he's not been that guy since then. And I'm with you, Bentley. I agree. That one, again, keep your own, I guess, but could have extended Garland early, paid him the money. You could have paid money somewhere else. I don't know that LeVert makes you a better team, especially after the Strus signing. Strus is kind of the guy I think you would count on to be that second option, third option, maybe your first option off the bench at times. But little perplexed by that. That's a good one.
I remember when Karis LeVert was really starting to establish himself, and that was the time period where I thought Rondé Hollis Jefferson was going to be a future star. I was like, wow, this 6'6" power forward is pretty good. He's like a better Chuck Hayes.
Western Conference legend Chuck Hayes.
Yeah, for me, the biggest head scratcher, I think, and I can talk myself into understanding why, but the James Harden saga with Philly, I think, is the biggest head scratcher for me. And it's from both sides, right? From the team side and the player side. The team has kind of made it publicly known that they're kind of done with James, and James has kind of made it publicly known that he's done with Philly. Then he goes and opts in, and I understand the money, right? From that perspective alone, he probably behind closed doors had conversations with his team, and they said, we're not going to get that money on the free agent market, so we need to opt in and then demand a trade or ask for a trade from Philly. I don't know who's going to be their dance partner, and I don't want to spoil it because we're going to talk about it in a minute, but it's just a head scratcher from both sides. I feel like if Harden had prioritized that he wants to go to a winner, which is what he has said, he wants to be traded somewhere where he can contend for a title because he doesn't feel like it's working in Philly, go into free agency then. And maybe you lose some money. I get that. But, if that's really your priority, he's made, what's he made? Like $210 million or something already in his career, not to mention endorsements and all the other stuff, strip club endorsements, right? But, it's a head scratcher for me, the whole situation, more so than really one single piece of it. The Harden saga, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts here in just a minute, in terms of where we think he might end up. Where's the dance partner for Philly to try to trade that big contract and maybe try to get something in return to compete? Because the front office has got to feel like they're a contender, right? I mean, they were the 1 seed not too long ago. So on that note, let's switch gears and let's talk about trades, right? Two big names still out there, and one we're going to talk about as a known commodity that it's interesting to see he's going to end up being the odd man out. We thought, or at least I thought, and maybe you guys agreed. We didn't talk a lot about it last year, but I thought DeAndre Ayton was going to be the odd man out in Phoenix last year, and no move ever materialized. And I think we're right back there again this offseason. But I want to start with kind of the big elephant in the room. Dame Lillard, does he end up in Miami? What do you think that package looks like? And do you think Portland can get value back on Dame from a team like Miami? Bentley, I'm going to start with you on this one. What are your thoughts on this Dame trade? He's requested the trade. They seem to, be on the same page in terms of they're ready to, honor his request. What's this trade going to shape up to be?
So I was reading earlier today, like an hour ago, probably there are reports of his agent calling teams that have been calling the Blazers, saying don't trade for Dame because he will be unhappy and you don't want that in your franchise, right? Specifically citing his request to go to Miami and only Miami. So we know that the move to Miami is coming, right? We don't know how it's coming, but we know that a player of Dame's ilk, you lose that trade every time if you're Portland. You just do. He's an all-NBA guy. He's been an all-NBA guy for 7-8 years, whatever it is. You don't trade that player and win the trade. It just doesn't happen. Now you trade Rudy Gobert and you win that trade because you absolutely fleeced Minnesota and, A-Rod, God knows what he's doing, making trades.
Yeah.
But if you trade a guy like Dame, you lose that trade. All right, so we understand that, right? That being said, going to Miami, if Miami is to package a deal to send to Portland, it's got to be like Jovic and Jaquez and Hero and Lowry probably for salary, and as many pick swaps and first rounders as you can give. Because that's what Portland's going to want. They're going to want every fucking thing possible that you can put together to send back their way. And I just, with Gabe Vincent being gone and with Max Strus being gone, and Portland, I'm assuming, going to say no to anything with Duncan Robinson because his contract is a little bit excessive. Like, the only thing I can think is those three guys in first round picks and swaps. Like, that's just kind of how it has to happen. Now, excuse me. If you're able to bring in a third team to take cap space, to send picks, to kind of do whatever needs to be done to get Dame to Florida, I think that then it becomes a more interesting piece, right? 3-teamers are always more interesting than 2-teamers. Yeah, whatever. Got that. But if they're actually able to pull it off where all 3 teams feel like they win the trade, which we know doesn't happen because you always lose if you trade a player like Dame, then I think that Dame is going to a team where as long as Bam and Jimmy are there, they can kind of fill the rest of the roster like Phoenix is trying to do right now. And if they have Dame, Jimmy, and Bam, I mean, that probably puts them in the top 4 in the East, right? Now, they just won the East without him, but they had all their role players, minus Tyler Hero. So I don't have a good answer, even though I think that Ryan kind of knows a third team specifically to take Jaquez off the hands of the Miami Heat. That might be able to facilitate a move from Dame to Miami. So I'll let him dive into that one here in a minute. But aside from the team that Ryan is going to bring up, I don't know off the top of my head really without doing deep dive into like cap space and who's able to cover that, because Dame makes so much money that they're going to have to fill it in somewhere. My opinion that it will have to be a 3-team trade because Miami just doesn't have the package and Portland has all the leverage here. Dame seems like a classy enough guy that he's going to come back and play ball, regardless of whether he's quote unquote happy or not in Portland. So I think a 1-for-1 Dame to Miami doesn't necessarily happen without one team feeling like they got fleeced.
Yeah, and real quick before I pass over to Ryan, two quick things. One, every year about this time when there's a big name on the market, it reminds me how much I dislike the NBA's trade rules. Like, I get it. You want to keep the money even and yada, yada, but I feel like it'd be way more entertaining for us as fans if it was just the fucking Wild Wild West, and Miami could just trade 50 picks to Portland and get Dame back and not have to worry about the money, and we could just make this thing happen and be simple and whatnot. But I digress. I get it, right? You're trying to avoid situations where one team just loads up on all the best players and trades away 100 first-round picks, et cetera, et cetera. Bentley, I want to ask you this question before I go over to Ryan, because I know Ryan has a particular team that makes a ton of sense as the third team in line. But if you're an Eastern Conference team, do you want to get involved as the third team? Because I've heard a couple of teams from the East floated out there, Nets being one, and I don't want to spoil too much, right? But they've been floated as one, and there's a couple other teams that do have some of that flexibility with contracts that would kind of make the money match. If you're an Eastern Conference team, do you really want to facilitate a trade for Dame to the East? Unless you're a non-contender, right? If you're tanking and you're just rebuilding, how much do you think these teams are going to take that into consideration, Bentley?
So I think that this is sort of a line of delineation, where the NFL and the NBA are different, right? NFL, they're big on not trading in division specifically, kind of less of a conference, as we saw with Matthew Stafford being traded to the Rams. I think if you're an Eastern Conference team, this is kind of a two-part answer, right? I'll give you the short answer first. Yes, if you're an Eastern Conference team, this is a 7-game series. If you meet them in the playoffs, you kind of feel like you have as good shot as any to beat them in a 7-game series, right? Like you have to be confident in the roster you've built and your coaching staff and whatnot. You think that our guys are better than your guys, 4 out of 7 times, right? So short answer, yes. I don't think it bothers teams as much as some people might think. Long answer, also yes, because the teams that are going to be able to facilitate the cap space are teams that are not going to be good.
Yeah.
They have the smaller payrolls, right?
Yep.
If it's Charlotte or Washington or Orlando, the teams that are not necessarily thinking that they're going to be competing against Dame and Miami in the playoffs this upcoming season, they're probably thinking, hey, we can take the salary, we get some assets or some picks back, and then we just keep it moving because we're not even going to see Dame in the playoffs in the next 2 years, right? Yep. So both answers would be yes for different reasons. But I don't think that a third team coming from the East to help facilitate this trade is like out of the realm of possibility. Brooklyn is a little bit of a different situation because they probably will be trying to win this year, hoping that Mikal Bridges takes another leap like we saw him last year after the trade. So if they are the one to do it, I think that they probably would be hoping to keep Dame, which, as we already mentioned, is not going to be the case. So I don't think that they're going to be able to do it. They can do it, but yeah, Brooklyn's kind of a weird situation there with that one specifically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point, right? The teams that have the flexibility to be able to do it are not the teams that are going to be competing. It is different in the NBA, right? Teams are butted right up against the salary cap and over the salary cap and in the luxury tax and all that. The ones that are competing are the ones that are there, and they're not the ones that are going to be, raising their hand to say, I'll take that. I'll take that dead salary on.
Yeah.
All right. Ryan, what are your thoughts on the Dame trade?
Well, first I want to apologize to my friend and coworker Kyle Landry in the chat for the slander about yellow card. If you have an issue with it, you can meet me at Ocean Avenue and we can talk it out. Sorry, that was a bad joke. That's a bad joke. All right. What were we talking about? Yeah, so the facilitating the trade. So Bentley suggested I know of a third team. I think San Antonio would love to get involved, specifically to bring Jaime Jaquez over to San Antonio, partly because Jaquez is a good player. I hated the Jaquez pick because now it's causing them issues because he's not as valuable as some other guys that could have been taken at that pick. But I think San Antonio, if they could get their hands on him, would love it. He'd be a hometown hero. He might sell as much as Wemby does in jerseys.
He really does.
And he's a good player, which helps. You don't want to just make money and be bad. You want to make money and have a contributor. Their front court's a little loaded, so maybe they don't. But I think like a team like that, especially in the Western Conference, would be willing to get involved. One thing I will say is I hope Dame doesn't get traded, so he drops a diss track about the Portland general manager, because I think that would be awesome.
True.
Because all the
dollar with the bars,
like Shaq, and Kobe were like the beginning of like the rap NBA players, and we'll have reached the ultimate version of that where it's people making fun of their own front offices. No, but I think as far as the Dame trade, like realistically, I think it has to go to Miami, and I think Portland unfortunately has found themselves in a situation where that's their only option. Like they can listen to other people and they can go, oh, we're not gonna like just listen to Miami. They have to say that.
Yeah.
But I don't think they can do it because
all real.
Yeah, all he's gonna do is go, okay, trade for me, but like I can I can be bad. Yeah. like I have a good reputation, but I can be bad.
Yeah.
And he wants to go to Miami. There's some packages Miami can give that aren't terrible, but unfortunately in the environment that the NBA is in, that's their option. Like if he's like, I'm going to Miami, that's pretty much it. Like they can trade him somewhere else, but they'll probably get even less.
Yeah.
Because of that. It's like, hey, we'll take the risk. We'll try to convince him. Like if you're the Nets or whoever it happens to be, right? You're like,
players have so much power in the NBA.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion. What I've seen a lot of Miami fans go is they're like, oh, well, like our package is so great for Dame, like we can give him anything. It's like you can be like the package isn't that great, but we'll probably still get him. Like let's calm down, Miami. Again, you're not that good, and you lost most of your role players that would even provide a lot for him. Like Tyler Hero is probably your only major asset outside of picks, and then Jaquez, I guess, and Nikola Jovic, who I love, great in the summer league. But like that's nothing for Damian Lillard. But yeah, I think that's the only option. I think Portland's in a rock and a hard place, and they put themselves there. They've been terrible for years managing that team, and I think most people would agree they've put themselves in bad cap situations. They've made bad trades, and they've always been like a fringe like competitor. They've never been like a team where you're like, they're going to win it this year. I don't think I've ever said that about Portland. And Portland's beat my hometown team many times. Yeah. And I've never been like, they're going to win it this year. Even after eliminating us, I didn't say that. So I just think they've mismanaged it. And they now are, as a great book says, they're reaping what they sowed.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned it, right? They've been throwing bad money at the roster for a long time because they've been trying to win with Dame, right? They've been trying to build a team around him. They just made the wrong moves, wrong picks, wrong free agent signings, wrong trades, etc. And some of it's injury, right? Some of it is health that has kind of, derailed some of what they've tried to do to put around Dame. But, it reminds me of the Cavaliers the first time LeBron was there, right? They couldn't, and it's two different levels, right? Obviously, Cleveland's trying to win a championship because LeBron gets them to the finals and he's the only guy on the roster. Whereas with Dame, they're trying to build a contender because they're, either a middling or a fringe or not even a playoff team throughout his career, and they're trying to get there, right? So it is different levels. I'm not trying to say that this Portland team is what Cleveland was during their run, but it feels the same, right? Gilbert went out and got Shaq and, players, right? Shaq was kind of the big one that they're like, oh, we're going to bring him in, and this is going to be the final piece to get that title with LeBron. It didn't work, right? It feels like a lot of that with Portland. And they've made their bed, right? Now they've got to sleep in it. I wonder how much, too, like Miami right now is saying, like, you have no leverage. We're offering you X, Y, and Z, take it or leave it, and that's why we haven't seen this go through yet. And I think both sides know eventually they're going to find whatever the middle ground is, and it's going to have to just happen, right? Both teams are going to have to pretend like they're happy with the trade and whatever that ends up being. San Antonio was an interesting choice, though, Ryan, because I don't look at them right. If I was thinking of third teams to get into a trade, San Antonio probably wouldn't even have been on my radar. So I really like that pick because I think it does make sense, and not necessarily just from who Jaime Jaquez is and the connection to Mexico across the border from San Antonio. I also think that he's a guy who is experienced in American basketball and the American basketball lifestyle. He's a winner at UCLA. I think he's a good locker room guy to bring in the same year you bring in Victor Wembanyama, right? From that perspective. So watch them two kind of grow together. Hawkins can be he could even be a bit of a mentor as a fellow rookie, right? So that's a very interesting team to throw into the mix there, and I like it. I like it.
Gary, who would be your third team if you thought there was going to be a third team to facilitate? If you said the San Antonio's not on your radar.
Yeah, I was looking more at the East teams. The Nets, I think, were kind of the one that I looked at, and I tried to convince myself that the Nets would do it because I didn't think that they were in the boat that you mentioned that they were. But you're probably right? I think Brooklyn feels better about their roster than I do. So for me, it was Brooklyn. I thought that they were going to be the third team because I look at that Brooklyn roster and I say you're a couple superstars away from being what you want to be in the East, right? You've got to go find those guys. They're not on the roster, in my opinion. I love Mikal Bridges. I just don't look at him and say he's the number one guy on a championship team, right? He is like Klay Thompson, right? For me, he could be for Brooklyn if they were able to get a couple guys in, or at least one, other big guy in. I think he could be what Klay Thompson was for that Warriors dynasty. Perimeter defender, good scorer, shooter, yada yada. So I looked at Brooklyn and I thought that was it. So yeah, I guess I kind of pigeonholed myself into Brooklyn. didn't really expand the aperture. So, but I like San Antonio. That's really good. My dad's got a question. Teams that really take risks, they're throughout history. I think there have been teams that have, but I think a lot of times we look with hindsight and say they made a mistake, right? In the moment, I don't know that we treat a lot of teams as being heavy risk takers. I think that we look at the NBA and the players that they go get, and you say, I see why they did that. They had to go get a face. They had to go get a name. They had to go get a player to fill a position. I think NBA teams view their moves as pretty risk averse, right? Pretty low risk because the NBA career is longer than other sports. The impact of injury is lower than other sports in a lot of ways. There are more available superstars, I think, in the NBA than in other sports because you look at football is very quarterback heavy, right? Those are all your superstars in the NFL, basically, with few exceptions. Baseball is very very, very focused on a few guys that are kind of the names of and faces of Major League Baseball. The NBA, on the other hand, I think has a bigger lot to pick from. And of course, there's always the LeBron James, the Kobe Bryant, the Michael Jordan, right? But I think the NBA has a bigger lot. Ryan, any thoughts on this in terms of the risk taking of the NBA teams? And I don't see them go out and say, I'm going to make a huge move and give up a bunch of stuff. I also think the NBA trade rules maybe keep some of this at bay as well.
Yeah, I mean, from a job security standpoint, a lot of guys are risk averse, right? And it really comes down to what's the expectation of the team. If getting into the playoffs every year is the expectation, then you can be pretty risk averse and probably do that depending on the construct of your roster, right? And maintain your job as GM or president of basketball, all those personnel decision makers. Mm-hmm. What I will say is the analytics revolution has definitely increased the risk profile that teams are willing to take on. You saw that with Philadelphia, right? It's like, hey, we're just going to be bad.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of risk outside of the basketball court that come with that. There's financial risk. There's your job. There's fan base loss, right? It's like, hey, the fan base will come back when we win, but we're not going to win for 5 years.
Right.
It's like, so, hopefully most of them come back, right? Like there is risk because this is a business.
Yeah.
So a lot of them view it from like a stock market, like that risk, right? Where it's there's blue chip guys, there's prospects who are huge variants, right? And that's where the risk comes in, is the people that view it from like an equity of a player standpoint and like how that affects the entire franchise as a whole. And the other thing I think that guys will take risk is injury risk, right? Guys will take on guys that it's like, hey, if this guy's healthy, we got it. But he's Kristaps is a good example, right? It's like, hey, if he stays healthy, Boston is increasing their risk. They're increasing their ceiling, but lowering their floor with the Kristaps trade, right? Like that is a risk. It's like, hey, we could legitimately be worse, like very, very easily, but we could be so much better.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And being willing to increase the aperture from a results perspective, being willing from the scatter plot to have more possible endings, right? Less linear. That is a risk in a lot of different ways. So yeah, there are guys that take risk. Obviously, a lot of teams don't, like I said, because they don't want to lose their jobs from a general manager's perspective. But there's definitely teams who do it. It's just not in the way that I think a lot of other sports do it.
Yeah. Bentley, what do you think?
Yeah, so I kind of thought of this from a more, since we're talking about moves and trades and picks and signings and stuff, I kind of went that direction with it. And I had a couple examples. I didn't go back super far in my brain because we're doing this on the fly, but Minnesota, I came up with 2 examples, which is kind of shocking. Didn't expect Minnesota to be at the top of my list right here with 2, but they traded Kevin Love for the number 1 overall pick, Andrew Wiggins. Kevin Love was an All-NBA guy, 25 and 12 every night. And they traded him for an unproven commodity. That seems like kind of a risky move, right? Like you have a guy who you can try to build around, or you can trade for this kid who's, 19 coming out of Kansas and nobody knows if he's going to be good or not. Now, Mabel Jordan has become one of the all-time greats, but that's another point, right? They also were risky last year when they traded 7 first-round picks to include some players, right? But technically 7 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert.
Yeah.
That's a pretty fucking risky move, if you ask me. In today's NBA, they zigged when everybody else is zagging, right? He's a guy that doesn't space the floor, and we saw when Donovan Mitchell was there that he got played off the court in playoff games. And they said, hey, we think he's good. We can play him. And they made that trade for him. Also, Phoenix making all of these deals. They made the deal last year to trade for Kevin Durant, and then they made the deal to trade for Bradley Beal. Basically emptied the cupboards to bring these guys in. Now, I get it, new owner syndrome. It happens in every sport. You get a new owner. They want to make moves. They want to improve, do all that stuff, right? But, that's pretty risky. If you were to say, hey, I'm trading for X player, it could be LeBron, it could be Steph, any number of the 8 best guys that are actually difference makers in the NBA. You say, I'm making a trade for this guy. Will it win me a championship? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, right? It's just that stuff it's very rare that happens, right? So for them to make the decision to go out and trade for one of those guys, one of the 8 guys that makes a difference, and then another one of, I don't know, the 30 best players in the league, which Bradley Beal could potentially be again, right? That's a risky move. There are teams I think that have recently, and Brian mentioned it with the growth of analytics in the sport of basketball, that have been risky, right? Even Ryan's team, the Rockets themselves, when they played 5 guys under 6'7", they just said, fuck us under, dude. We don't need it. We're going to shoot 68 threes every single night, and we're going to make the playoffs.
Only mistake was that Chuck Hayes was not in the lineup.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
But from a roster configuration standpoint, there are teams that I think that are willing to take risks. The Brooklyn Nets, they signed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the same offseason, and they made the trade for James Harden because they wanted to do that. And then they made another trade with James Harden, to get Ben Simmons, who was even riskier than James Harden, turns out. I think Dallas is very risky. They just gave Kyrie a bunch of money. Any team that really gets in the Kyrie business is running a risk of being awful. But Now, I know that they were kind of up against the clock. Well, Kyrie was up against the clock last year with that trade. But, like, I was a risky move for Dallas. They traded away their best wing defenders for a guy who doesn't play defense and doesn't play sometimes. Like, there are teams that are out there that are definitely willing to take risks, I think, in the name of winning and potential. It's probably more common than we realize. Oh, and the Clippers. They traded everything to get Paul George, including Shea, and 97 first-round picks and swaps. And, you know, the answer is yes. And I think it happens pretty frequently, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit nuanced, right, with the definition of risk too, right? NBA teams, I think from a job security perspective, as Ryan put it, I think the high risk, high reward moves don't feel that way, right? In a lot of ways because of the low volume of the talent pool that's there, right? So if you make a move for one of those, as you put it, Bentley, those top 8 guys, it doesn't feel, to maybe an outsider's perspective, it doesn't feel risky because you're going to get one of those guys that has that potential to move the needle like that. But as you put it, if it doesn't go right, that's the downside, and you could set your team up for failure for a long time, right? Very much so. And I go back to a move. You mentioned Brooklyn. Let's go even farther back with Brooklyn and Danny Ainge, right? Who took advantage of a couple of different teams when he was with Boston with some risky moves that, you know, from the perspective that you're looking at it, Bentley, you could consider those risky for Danny Ainge to make with Boston, trading away icons who brought them a title, etc. But they got picks back, and those picks turned into big time assets for that team. Yep. And he made the trade with Philly as well in that swap and getting more assets back as well, and then ending up with Jason Tatum and whatnot in those moves. But Brooklyn took a big swing at going to get Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and it didn't work out for them. And you see what happened to them for years. They were in the doldrums until they were able to really draft well and put some talent on the floor, and they've kind of built a little bit of a better roster there. And Brooklyn it's a flashy destination for free agents as well, with the Kyrie and Kevin Durant signings and James Harden as well, right, going there. You know, looking for that New York frame of mind and being around Jay-Z and of course being around Beyonce, right, when she's in the building. But yeah, I think this conversation we just had kind of highlights the nuance, right, of what you view as risky may not appear to be risky to somebody else because they say, oh, fuck, you got Kevin Durant, right? Well, if you don't win with Kevin Durant, you're realizing that risk of giving up those assets that then on the back end aren't worth as much, right? Or maybe they're worth more because they're on another team and doing well, that sort of thing. So I think that's important to highlight, that, you know, risk is sort of kind of what perspective you take on it, for sure. All right. So we talked about Dame. Let's talk a little bit about James Harden. And I want to frame this a little bit because I mentioned it a moment ago, but I don't know who the suitor is, right? So I'm really interested to get your guys' perspective, because Ryan especially, I think, has interesting ways of kind of framing things and saying, well, this makes total sense. And then I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that does make total sense. Why the fuck didn't that for me, right? So Ryan, the basketball nerd, I'm going to leave you for last, bud. Bentley,
good.
Bentley, I'm really interested to hear your perspective too, though, because we've talked a lot about who James Harden is,
yeah,
and what he brings, and where, you know, what team I think could use a guy who isn't what he used to be, but he can flash a little bit. Sometimes you get a night where he hits 7 threes and you get a little bit of a feel of, oh yeah, okay, you know, maybe he can still cook a little bit. So what's going on with Harden? Where does he end up? What's a good fit, right? I kind of want to hear both perspectives. If it's the same team, right, then certainly. But let me know where you think he'd be a good fit, because I'll be upfront. I don't see a team that I look at right now and say, yeah, Ryan's struggling with the camera.
He looks so good right now. It's incredible.
Yeah, right? I don't see a team that I look at and say, James Harden makes that team a contender. James Harden makes that team better. So talk to me about that.
So there is one team that I think that James Harden makes better and makes a contender, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't mean to be like dismissive of the segment here, but like to me, that's just the simple answer, right? Like James Harden, they should have beaten Boston, in my opinion, last year in the playoffs.
You're up 3-1.
They're
That's James Harden's thing, man. Get up 3-1 and
it's
can't win.
it's so that I put that on Embiid 100%,
for sure.
rather than
not my
like James Harden went to Boston and won games. Like, what more do you want him to do, right? I guess like play well in game 6 and 7, but regardless, like that's why you have the fucking MVP on your team.
Yeah.
So to me, and I'm like trying to run through teams in my head right now and rosters of like where he could work in San Antonio, right? Like to play along Vic, but like San Antonio would never do that, and James Harden would also never do that. You know,
that exact reason is probably why they weren't on my radar for being part of the Dame trade either, right? Like,
sure, yeah.
I just look at San Antonio and I feel like they're in their own little bubble over here.
Yeah,
they just got Vic, and they're looking at the next 5 years of how do we maximize what Vic is, and how do we become a championship team in the next 3 to 5 years? Because that's just what I expect San Antonio to do.
Yeah. I have one that I think would just be funny for the entire NBA. Send him to New Orleans for like Brandon Ingram or something. just pair Zion and James Harden together, because like in theory their games would work wonderfully together, right? Yeah. Like they should mesh on a basketball court very well, and they would mesh other places very well that are not basketball courts, right? I like, again, just running through teams in my head. Is there a trade with Chicago maybe where like they bring back LaVine to Philly and then he goes to Chicago and plays with Kobe White, one of Ryan's favorite players, and then like DeMar DeRozan and a Vucevic type deal, like that makes Chicago better, yes, but does that make them a non-play-in team? I don't know. It's an interesting thought process. I don't think it makes him like a whole lot better, but it kind of brings, because he's a point guard now at this point in his career, and they don't really have like a stud point guard. They kind of just have LaVine and DeRozan run the offense most of the time. But then it kind of brings back to your point, like, do you trade him in conference? Do you think that you're going to see him in the playoffs? Like stuff like that. I think that Philly is just the most reasonable answer. Like, he makes them a contender. They were a contender last year. They have the reigning MVP. Maxey should get better. They still have Tobias Harris now on an expiring contract. You can trade it for a crumble cookie, and then James Harden will be happy. Like, it just makes the most sense to me.
Good, man.
They are. Like, Daryl Morey is his guy. You know that Daryl Morey is going to make moves to help James Harden succeed. Like, to me, it makes the most sense for him to play in Philly. But we know that's not what he wants to do. And I'm with you where I can't, like, I don't know where he goes that makes them better. Like, people mention the Clippers, and it's like, well, we know he's not going to set a culture there. Nobody else has set a culture there. Like, that, I don't know.
He's not going to play in the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, like, to me, that doesn't move the needle. Like, and then you bring him and Westbrook back together. We know they don't like to play together. It's like, what are we doing here? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, it's Philly.
Yeah. I copped out as well when I was thinking about this for Harden. I think that they're going to mend fences and he's going to stay. And I think it just makes sense for both sides, because I don't see a trade where Philly gets demonstrably better either, where they move Harden and get better. Because like you mentioned, he's a point guard at this point in his career. His value just isn't what, the name, right? The name James Harden holds a certain value, but the player James Harden doesn't hold that value. So for me, I'm copping out, but I know Ryan's got something really creative here for us. So let's get over to Ryan.
Before he goes, I just want to double down because I'm thinking about it again over in my head. I actually really like that Chicago deal for Philly, because Philly is expecting Maxey to take a leap. So if they could get LaVine into Philly, so you go Maxey, LaVine, and Embiid, I actually kind of really like that for Philly now that I think about it.
That's a good point. I don't hate that. If you can get Levine back and not give up any other assets.
Yeah.
Depends on how much Chicago values Levine. Right?
Yep.
Ryan, talk to me, bud. Where's James Harden going? Where's
This was a really interesting conversation to hear, because I do think this is such a unique situation as far as where he fits. Like you're saying, I think, Gary, you started to bring up a really good point about what does Philadelphia get out of this, right? Because it creates a domino effect where it's like, okay, maybe Embiid's leaving now, right? And it just, he's like, is Embiid going to hang around if Harden is gone? Is it like, are they going to, like, what do they do, right? They're pretty assetless at this point, and there's a lot of second and third order effects here that I think could be really unfortunate for Philadelphia. I think the best place is Philadelphia. I agree with Bentley that the best chance he has of winning a championship is Philadelphia. But we have to consider that maybe that's not what he wants. We have to consider that, right? When he is looking at the bird's eye view of his career, and he's like, does it matter if I win a championship? He might have just said, no, it doesn't matter. Like he might have hit the point, right? Like we all at some point realize we're going to die. Like, you know, right? It's like, and then it's kind of scary. And then you're like, well, whatever. Like most people just are like, whatever, right? James Harden might be at the whatever stage. You know, it's like, hey, I'm going to win a championship with Houston. Oh man, maybe I'm not going to win a championship. I need to move. Oh, I need to move again. Yeah, whatever. You know, it's very possible he's reached that stage where he's just like, I'm fine going just at a place I like better.
And that might be part of, you know, I mentioned the whole opting in felt a little perplexing if he really truly wanted to get to a contender, because I think he has to realize that his salary is prohibitive for a team to go trade for him, because you got to give up assets and you've got to figure out how to make that salary work and make it balance in the trade, etc. It's not easy to make a trade for a guy making as much money as he is, who's on this kind of far end of the back end of his career.
Yeah, I think a good indicator that he possibly is at the point where he doesn't care as much about the ring is he wanted to go to Houston.
Yeah.
And allegedly the reason he opted in is because the interest was not mutual. Houston was like, hey, we prefer Van Vliet. Like, we're going in that direction. And it's like, why do you want to come here? Like, if your goal is to win, you're not winning where you're
a house there.
I mean, yeah, he owns a house. He's beloved here. Like, he's one of my favorite players of all time. He's one of the fan bases, maybe the second greatest Rocket of all time. Like, I mean, I completely get it, right? But that shows that he maybe doesn't care about that. So maybe the Chicago deal makes sense if he just wants to be in Chicago. It's like that team probably doesn't win a championship, but maybe that makes sense. So really, maybe the aperture is widening here where there's a lot of other options where he's willing to go. What I will say is I'll throw out one option. Okay, I don't have anything creative, but I'll throw out one option. Okay. And there's something that a lot of people know about a city in the Pacific Northwest. And it is known for having the most strip clubs per capita. Roughly 9,800 people per one strip club. So a straight swap for Dame makes a lot of sense for both parties. So James can like go out, you know, teach Scoot how to be an NBA point guard and have a good time, and like, because he clearly, like, winning's not his number one priority. Like I said, I don't think it is anymore. Because I just don't see a place where he is better than in Philadelphia. There's just not.
So that is actually an interesting perspective, right? If you're Dame and Philly enters the fray and Portland says, yep, we can make this work. Let's bring Harden out. He's a guy who's on his way out. We don't have to worry about him eating minutes from Scoot. He can teach him how to play the game. He can teach him how to, you know, he can teach him what not to do in his free time, that sort of thing. If you're Dame and you have an opportunity to go play with the defending MVP, to play with Embiid and play on that roster there, it's a good roster. You mentioned it's assetless, but in and of itself, right? You add Dame especially to that roster, who I think is, I don't know that there's any question, but I think, right, that he's a demonstrably better player than James Harden is one-on-one, right? Just player to player. Right now at this stage of their careers, would you consider easing up on the requirement to go to Miami if Philly came into the fray? I think we've all established, right, we believe that the Miami deal is just, it's going to get done. But that's a really interesting, if I'm Dame, maybe I reconsider because I get an opportunity to go play with Joel Embiid, who's one of the, unicorns probably that we could consider as big men, right? His ability to kind of stretch the floor. He's a really good defender, et cetera, et cetera. Would you reconsider, Ryan, if you're Dame and you have an opportunity to go to Philly instead of some of the other teams that have kind of entered the mix?
Yeah, I think if that became an option, that would make sense for him to go. I don't understand why Miami is his only place he wants to go outside. He wants to play with his buddies, I guess. I guess he has a good relationship there, and Miami's cool, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think like he's really limiting his potential by like trying to do that. But I have no idea what's in his mind. I'm guessing. So, but yeah, on paper that makes a lot of sense. I do think that Dame's game probably fits pretty well in Philadelphia. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Especially with Bentley mentioned Maxey, right? They want him to be the primary ball handler. I think you get Dame in a situation where he doesn't have to be that. His game could, honestly, offensively, he could take even another step where he just focuses on scoring the fucking ball.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options for him. I think a straight swap is the only thing that makes sense to me, honestly. Like I was being funny, but it really like contractually, as far as like getting something back that like Portland would probably want to move him, like would probably want a 3-team, like move him around, but like that kind of makes sense to me. And he's on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
Like he signed, he re-upped for 1 year. It's like, you teach this guy how to play for a year and then you're gone and you can go wherever you want.
Yeah, go have fun. You're not cratering your roster if you do make that move.
In Philadelphia, it probably has to give up like a little bit more than just Harden because of contractual issues. I actually think Harden is still a better player than Dame right now. But I think it's pretty close, but the contract is going to require Philadelphia to have to give more. But yeah, I just don't think Dame wants to go there, and he's going to force his way to Miami, which I think is a mistake.
Yeah. Bentley, what do you think? Would you reconsider if you were Dame with an opportunity to play with Embiid?
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes more sense, like as is, than going to Miami.
He just wants to go to South Beach.
Yeah, like no state income tax. I get that. He's going to make $65 million here in 2 years. While Ryan was talking, I was on the trade machine, and 1-for-1 swap, Dame Harden does not work. Just the money for the 76ers, because Harden's making $35 million right now, and Dame is going to make $45 million. But James Harden and PJ Tucker both works in a swap. But also a 1-for-1 swap, Harden and Levine does work. So just tossing that nugget out there. It's funny. Daryl Morey, if you're listening, call me.
We're starting the campaign. Harden to Chicago, Levine to Philly.
I do think that that Dame should probably reconsider if Philly becomes available. And neither of them have no trade clauses, so like they can't say no. You know what I mean? Right. And we all know that Daryl Morey, like his mantra is like, I have to have 2 stars, right? Like I have 2 guys. So we know, 1, that he has to have 2 guys, 2, that he's a patient mover, right? He held out on Ben Simmons forever.
Yep.
Didn't make that trade immediately. So he's going to hold out for Harden until he can get a haul back that he thinks is viable. And if I were him, I would absolutely be calling Portland.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, bring your guy here. Now, I don't know if Portland's willing to do that, but I would do it if I was Lillard.
For sure. All right, so let's talk a little summer league real quick before we get out of here. I want to just get maybe a couple of, probably too early, right? Because the real, I guess I shouldn't say real, but the Vegas summer league, right? The big one hasn't officially kicked off yet. I believe tomorrow is opening game of Vegas Summer League, if I remember correctly. If not tonight, I can't. It's tonight or tomorrow. But either way, early games played. We've seen some of the rookies. We haven't seen Vic play yet. He did say he would play in Vegas, but he wasn't going to play before that. He skipped international basketball because he wanted to play in the Summer League with San Antonio here in Vegas. So, Ryan, I'm going to go your way first on this. Give me maybe a couple quick thoughts, quick takeaways from some of these early Summer League games that we've seen.
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of overreaction, as Summer League often is. What I'll say is Charlotte did a disservice to their team the way they built it. Even though it's Summer League, you can't just be like, let's put 5 guys out there who we want to watch play and see how good they are, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. When your top prospect needs someone who can get him the ball, I guess they're just not worried about it. It's like, hey, let's just get him some game time. But that's my major critique. I think Brandon Miller is going to be fine. I just think that was kind of silly from Charlotte's perspective. I think, I think the Jalen Williamses of the world and the Keegan Murrays of the world and the Malachi Branhams, they are, as a great philosopher said, they are who we thought they were. You should go out if you're a second-year player that was a star or contributor and probably do pretty well in Summer League. And if you're a third-year guy, your career might be over if you're doing bad in Summer League.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a very pivotal point. I think we learn a lot about players because if a guy's been on a team for 2+ years and he's coming back into Summer League, it's do or die. And unfortunately, some of them, it's over. It just ends. So I think that's interesting. I think it's cool to see a lot of guys in a not super well organized format sometimes, because you get to see the athleticism that doesn't always show in a regular game.
Yeah.
Because they get a lot of open floor stuff and guys who are
dunks.
And guys who are never going to play again, right? Your overseas guys they bring in for veteran presences. Is that's just
arms.
Yeah, that's cool. It's good that they get to do it. My boy Jacob Gilliard from University of Richmond. He's probably not going to play in the NBA for very long, but
King.
Good for him. Yeah, he'll be great for the league that we're building.
Yes, our league. He'll be the best. He'll be MVP every year.
Oh, 100%. I love Summer League though. I think it's cool, and I'm excited for big Summer League. And I think the people that bet on Summer League are high-level degenerates.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Let's calm down. I'm sitting right here.
Bentley, what are your thoughts? Early games here, Summer League.
Keegan Murray had 41 last night, which he started games in the second round of the playoff.
Yeah. That's probably
first round of the playoff
score against Summer League players.
Yeah, what are we doing here, Sacramento?
When you set the rookie record for 3-pointers, you probably should have a good Summer League.
Yeah, he probably is not going to play in Vegas, and I get that. I am excited to watch their Euro League MVP that they brought over. That'll be a lot of fun, I think. The Spurs without Vic were pretty impressive. They scored 109 points. In our group chat a couple days ago, Ryan said that Jaime Jaquez looks like a bust, and I said, "Go fuck yourself." And then Jaime Jaquez also said, "Go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
I think that he's looked really good. Now, again, it's Summer League. He should look good. He's better than a lot of players on the court. I think that Jalen Hood-Schifino has looked really good, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited to watch Orlando. I think that Anthony Black and Paolo, I hope that they can develop some chemistry in the Summer League if Paolo plays. I don't know if Paolo's playing. I would have to double-check that roster, but I would assume he would. He's a second-year guy. Hopefully he does. But we kind of touched on this last night offline, and I'm sure that Gary's going to bring it up, but I think the jerseys are awful. These are a bunch of guys that nobody knows. Don't put the name where we can't see it, please. I'm excited to watch everybody when they get to Vegas. That's when the real Summer League starts. The games in Salt Lake City and Sacramento have been fun, but the real stuff starts on Friday when everybody gets to Vegas.
Yeah.
Paolo is not playing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
He's too good.
Yeah. Yeah, the jerseys are atrocious. I get the international flair to it. I get that the international game and the NBA game have kind of fused, especially over the last decade, but yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. The names on the bottom of the jersey, it looks like it's like part of a logo, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Put them back on the top of the damn jerseys for sure.
Yep.
Can I add one more thing
Absolutely.
before we try to get out of here? What I will say is, as fans of two teams that aren't very good, these are our only possible championships. It's the summer league. So we got to live it up before the regular season starts.
That is fair. That is fair.
Yeah.
I only really have one takeaway that you guys haven't already hit. And I'm probably going to show my colors here of having a soft spot for Gonzaga. I really like watching Gonzaga. I like Mark Few. I like the way he's built that program, especially being up there in the Pacific Northwest. I will say that Chet Holmgren was pressing really, really badly in his first game back, but I like that he put work into his body. I like that he put work into his durability and being a more physical player potentially. And I thought once he settled into that first game, and now it's eluding me now who they played in the first game, but their first game in Summer League, when he kind of settled in, he looked a lot more like the Chet Holmgren that Oklahoma City drafted with such high expectations, and the Summer League star really that he was before the foot injury last year. I thought he settled in, looked pretty good, and I have mild expectations. I don't want to put too much on it because, of course, the foot, we got to see it hold up over time, but I would love to see Chet get back and be that guy, and potentially an OKC team with a really, really, really good young core, adding him to that mix as a real kind of big who can score, who can stretch the floor, and who's a really good help defender, I think can help a lot with a team that looked like they were really budding into something last season. So I'm really excited to see Chet healthy on the floor. Let's keep it that way. Take care of your body, take care of that foot, and keep yourself on the floor, big man. All right, closing thoughts here. Bentley, what you got for me?
I'm just ready to watch Summer League, dude. I'm excited to see the kids get out there and run around, have a good time. I hope to be there one day when it occurs. Maybe next year we all go as a podcast, do some live content. Summer League's a good time. Offseason's a lot of fun, but I'm ready for football, dude.
That's fair. That's fair. Ryan, what about you?
Well, one of my favorite parts of the Summer League, from a guy who collects cards, as y'all know, is the rampant speculation off of a halfway decent Summer League game. I love that. It's like this guy was drafted 52nd, scored 9 points on 100% efficiency by now. I'm like, all right, I hope he does well, but
he's the new Dogecoin.
Yeah, it's so the speculative markets are always fun during Summer League. Gambling, cards, whatever happens to be the. I guess there's NBA cryptocurrency. There's Top Shot or whatever NFTs available out there. Yeah. It's just Summer League is a great time to lose money.
Yeah, for sure.
If you are going to gamble, take the underdog on the spread. It's at like a fucking 64% clip or something like that.
Take the points.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys. For Bentley, for Ryan, this has been another episode of Backyard Buckets. We're talking off season. Next week, we'll have a little more Summer League to review, and we're going to start coming up with some really creative topics to keep the content flowing in the off season. But until then, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for the participation, Landry and Dad. Really appreciate it. We are